The massive trading hub of Kepler Station floated in the darkness between star systems like a city made of metal and glass. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its ports every day, bringing cargo and traders from across the galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the station's command center, watching the endless stream of vessels come and go through the transparent aluminum windows. Jake had been running Kepler Station for 3 years now, since humanity joined the Galactic Council. Before that, the station belonged to the Altarian Trade Consortium, but they handed it over to human management as part of the integration treaty. Most days, Jake enjoyed the work. The station was neutral territory, which meant every species could trade here safely. It also meant Jake had to deal with a lot of different alien customs and sometimes very strange problems. Today was different, though. Today the station hosted a diplomatic gathering, and Jake could feel the tension in the recycled air. Representatives from 12 different species had arrived over the past week, and not all of them got along well with each other. The Kratheri delegation alone had brought 3 warships, which was unusual for a peaceful trade meeting. In the main conference hall, Ambassador Helen Carter from Earth was setting up her presentation materials. She was one of the few human diplomats with real experience dealing with alien species, and Jake respected her calm approach to even the most difficult situations. Helen noticed Jake watching from the doorway and waved him over. "How are our guests?" "Behaving?" Helen asked quietly. "The usual complaints about food, atmosphere, and gravity settings," Jake replied. "But the Kratheri are acting strange. They keep asking about our defense systems and patrol schedules." Before Helen could respond, a deep voice echoed through the hall. "The session will now begin," announced the station's automated system. Delegates from all 12 species took their seats around the large circular table. Jake noticed how the seating arrangement seemed to split the room into 2 groups, with the older, more established species on one side and the newer members, like humanity, on the other. Elder Vorak of the Veshan Empire slowly rose from his seat. The ancient alien looked like a tall, thin tree with gray bark-like skin and glowing blue eyes that had seen thousands of years pass by. When Elder Vorak spoke, everyone listened, because his people were among the oldest surviving civilizations in the galaxy. "I have called this gathering to share information that concerns us all," Elder Vorak began, his voice carrying the weight of ages. "Our archives contain records that go back 10,000 years. In those records, we have found warnings about a species that matches the characteristics of our newest council members." Jake felt Helen tense beside him. Every eye in the room turned toward the human delegation, which consisted only of Helen and Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from the Solar Defense Force. "What kind of warnings?" asked War Marshal Zephyx of the Kratheri Dominion. The reptilian warrior was easily the most intimidating being in the room, with scales that looked like living armor and eyes like burning coals. His species had built their empire through conquest and had never lost a major war. Elder Vorak activated a holographic display above the table. Ancient symbols appeared in the air, slowly translating into common galactic script. The archives speak of a species called the Awakened Ones. According to these records, they appeared peaceful at first, engaging in trade and diplomacy. But when provoked, they became something else entirely. What happened to them? Helen asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "They destroyed 3 entire star systems in their rage," Elder Vorak replied. "Not just the military targets, but everything. Planets, moons, asteroid belts, even the stars themselves were left lifeless. The records say they fought with such intensity that space itself seemed to burn around them." War Marshal Zephyx made a sound that might have been laughter. "You ask us to fear bedtime stories, old one? I have studied these humans for months. They solve problems with words instead of weapons. They trade instead of conquer. They negotiate instead of dominate. If these are your awakened ones, then your ancestors must have been very weak indeed. Several other delegates murmured agreement. The Vorthan representative, a creature that looked like a giant spider made of crystal, clicked its mandibles dismissively. The humans have been in space for less than 200 years. My people have been exploring the galaxy for 50 times. Longer. What could they possibly teach us about warfare? Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez had remained silent throughout the discussion, but Jake could see her jaw tightening with each dismissive comment. Amy was a career military officer who had served in the border wars against human pirates and rebels. She knew what humans could do when pushed too far, even if these aliens did not. Perhaps, Elder Vorek continued, you should examine their history more carefully. Humans have spent most of their existence fighting wars against their own species. They have developed weapons capable of destroying their entire world several times over. They have survived ice ages, plagues, and disasters that would have ended most civilizations. Exactly my point, War Marshal Zephyx interrupted. They fight among themselves like primitive animals. That shows weakness, not strength. A truly powerful species unites under strong leadership, as the Kratheri have done. Jake watched Helen's face carefully. As a diplomat, she had trained herself not to show emotion during tense negotiations, but he could see the concern in her eyes. She knew something the others did not, and it was not something she could easily explain to aliens who had never experienced human warfare firsthand. I propose a test, War Marshal Zephyx announced suddenly. The Kratheri Dominion will demonstrate the true weakness of humanity by claiming one of their colony worlds. If they resist with the strength you claim they possess, we will acknowledge your warnings. If they surrender like the cowards I believe them to be, then we will know the truth. Room fell silent. Even the normally chattering Altarian delegates stopped their constant whispered conversations. Everyone understood what Zephyx was suggesting. It was not just a military action. It was a direct challenge to humanity's right to exist as equals. In the galactic community, Elder Vorek's glowing eyes dimmed with what looked like sadness. I cannot stop you from this course of action, but remember that I have warned you. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Which world? Amy Rodriguez asked quietly. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the steel beneath the words. War Marshal. Zephyx smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. The farming colony of New Denver. It is small, isolated, and lightly defended. Perfect for demonstrating how easily human resolve crumbles under pressure. Helen closed her eyes for a moment, then opened, them with a look Jake had never seen before. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen and was powerless to stop it. The meeting ended with polite farewells and diplomatic pleasantries, but everyone knew that everything had changed. War was coming, and despite Elder Vorak's ancient warnings, most of the galaxy was about to learn why those warnings had been written in the first place. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of New Denver as Colony Administrator Ben Carter made his daily rounds through the settlement. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakeries and the sweet scent of growing crops. Children played in the streets while their parents prepared for another day of peaceful farming life on the Rim world that had become home to 200,000 human settlers over the past 15 years. Ben stopped at the communications center to check the daily reports from the orbital platforms. Everything looked normal. 3 cargo ships were scheduled to arrive that afternoon with supplies from Earth, and the harvest projections for this season looked better than ever. New Denver had become one of the most successful agricultural colonies in human space, providing food for dozens of other worlds. Dr. Lisa Hayes was already at her desk in the medical center when the first alarms began to sound. As the colony's chief medical officer, She had seen her share of emergencies over the years, but something about these alarms felt different. The sound was coming from the orbital defense stations, not from any of the ground-based systems. Sheriff Tony Blake was in his office reviewing patrol schedules when his emergency communicator crackled to life. The voice on the other end was tense and filled with barely controlled fear. "Sheriff, we have unknown ships dropping out of hyperspace. They're not responding to our identification requests, and they're moving into attack formation." Ben Carter rushed to the colony's main communications array and opened a channel to the approaching fleet. On the view screen, he could see dozens of dark, angular ships that looked nothing like the peaceful trading vessels that usually visited New Denver. These ships had the unmistakable design of warships, with weapon ports clearly visible along their hulls. "Unknown vessels, this is Colony Administrator Ben Carter of New Denver," he transmitted. "You are entering protected human space. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came quickly, and it chilled Ben to his bones. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to War Marshal Zephyx himself, his reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile. Behind him, Ben could see other Crathari warriors preparing weapons and battle gear. "Human Administrator, I am War Marshal Zephyx of the Crathari Dominion. Your world has been selected for conquest to demonstrate the weakness of your species to the galaxy. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or we will take your world by force." Ben felt his mouth go dry, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "War Marshal, there must be some misunderstanding. New Denver is a peaceful agricultural world. We have no military installations and pose no threat to anyone. Surely we can resolve this through negotiation." Zephyx's laugh was like the sound of metal scraping against stone. "There will be no negotiation, human. Surrender now, or watch your colony burn." The transmission ended, leaving Ben staring at a blank screen. Around him, the colony's emergency coordinators were already beginning evacuation procedures and trying to contact the Solar Defense Force. But Ben knew that help was days away at best, and the Crathari fleet was already moving into position above their world. Dr. Lisa Hayes began organizing the medical teams for mass casualty treatment while simultaneously preparing to evacuate the hospitals. She had trained for disasters, but nothing had prepared her for the possibility of an actual alien invasion. The colony's medical facilities were designed to handle farming accidents and the occasional outbreak of colonial flu, not warfare. Sheriff Tony Blake gathered his deputies and the few retired military personnel who had settled on New Denver. Marine Sergeant Carlos Wright was visiting his family during leave from active duty, and he quickly became the unofficial military commander of the colony's desperate defense preparations. Carlos had served in 3 combat zones, but he had never faced anything like this. "We have maybe 40 people with real military training," Carlos told the assembled group. "The planetary militia has about 200 volunteers, but most of them have never fired a shot in anger. We have hunting rifles, some construction explosives, and whatever we can improvise from farming equipment." Above them, the Crathari fleet finished moving into position. The orbital platforms that provided communication and navigation services for the colony were the first targets. Brilliant flashes of energy lit up the sky as the platforms exploded one by one. Within minutes, New Denver was cut off from the rest of human space. Ben Carter made one last attempt at communication, broadcasting on all frequencies. "War Marshal Zephyx, I formally request safe passage for the civilian population, especially the children. They have done nothing to deserve this attack." The only response was the beginning of the orbital bombardment. Energy beams lanced down from the Crathari ships, striking the colony's power plants, communications arrays, and government buildings. The ground shook with each impact, and the sky filled with smoke and debris. Carlos Wright organized the evacuation of the main settlements, directing families toward the underground, shelters that had been built as protection against the severe weather that sometimes struck New Denver. The shelters were designed to hold the entire population for several days, but no one had ever imagined they would need to protect against alien warships. Dr. Lisa Hayes worked frantically to move critical patients from the hospitals to the underground medical facilities. The constant bombardment made transportation dangerous, and several medical vehicles were destroyed by near misses from the Crothery weapons. She watched helplessly as buildings she had known for years disappeared in flashes of alien fire. The bombardment continued for 6 hours without pause. When it finally stopped, nearly every structure on the surface had been reduced to rubble. The Crothery had systematically destroyed everything that made New Denver a functioning colony. The farms, the schools, the hospitals, the homes where families had lived and loved and built their lives together. Captain Steve Collins had been loading cargo at the spaceport when the attack began. His ship, the Meridian, was a small courier vessel designed for speed rather than combat. As the bombardment started, he made a desperate decision. While the Crothery focused their attention on the surface targets, he launched his ship and pushed the engines beyond their safety limits. The Crothery noticed his escape attempt and sent 2 fighters after him, but the Meridian was faster, and Steve was a skilled pilot. He managed to reach the hyperspace jump point just as enemy weapons fire began to find his range. The ship's hull was scorched, and several systems were damaged, but he had made it out of the system alive. In the underground shelters, the survivors huddled together in the darkness. The bombardment had knocked out most of the power systems, and they were relying on emergency lighting and battery-powered communication equipment. Ben Carter tried to maintain order and hope among the colonists, but everyone could hear the sounds of Crothery landing craft touching down on the surface. Sheriff Tony Blake and Sergeant Wright organized the final defense preparations. They had maybe 3 days of supplies in the shelters, and after that they would have to either surrender or try to fight their way out. Neither option seemed likely to succeed against the overwhelming Crothery force now occupying their world. The last transmission from New Denver was a brief message from Dr. Lisa Hayes, BROADCAST, on a hidden emergency frequency that the Crothery had not yet discovered. Her voice was calm and professional, but everyone who heard it could detect the underlying desperation. This is New Denver Colony to any human vessels in range. We are under attack by Crothery forces. The surface has been destroyed and civilian. Casualties are severe. We are trapped in underground shelters with limited supplies. Please send help if anyone can hear this message. Then the transmission cut to static, and New Denver fell silent. Captain Steve Collins stumbled out of his damaged ship at Luna Station, with burns on his hands and smoke still rising from the Meridian's overloaded engines. The dock workers who rushed to help him stopped when they saw the expression on his face. Steve had been flying between human colonies for 15 years, and everyone who knew him understood that he was not easily shaken by anything. Admiral Patricia Kane was in her office reviewing fleet deployment reports when the emergency alert reached her desk. The message was brief but devastating. New Denver had been attacked by alien forces. Orbital bombardment confirmed. Unknown number of casualties. Colony presumed lost. She read the report 3 times before the full meaning sank in. Within NA. Our Steve Collins was sitting across from Admiral Kane in the secure briefing room at Luna Station Command Center. His voice was hoarse from smoke inhalation, but he gave a complete account of everything he had witnessed. The systematic destruction of the orbital platforms, the bombardment of civilian targets, the complete silence that had followed. How many people lived on New Denver? Admiral Kane asked quietly. 200,000, Steve replied. Mostly families with children. It was a farming world, Admiral. They had no military installations, no strategic value. The Crathery attacked them just to prove they could. Admiral Kane had served in the Solar Defense Force for 20 years, but she had never dealt with anything like this. Humanity had fought wars before, but always against other humans. The idea of aliens deliberately targeting civilians was something that most people had never seriously considered. President Nicole Foster received the news while attending a cultural exchange ceremony with the Altarian delegation at the United Nations building in New York. She excused herself politely and walked to her private office, where she spent 10 minutes reading the initial reports. Then she canceled all her remaining appointments and called an emergency session of the United Earth Congress. The emergency session convened at midnight Earth time. Representatives from every human world attended either in person or through secure video links. President Foster stood at the podium and delivered the news in simple, direct terms. An alien species called the Crathery had attacked New Denver without provocation, destroying a peaceful colony and killing or capturing 200,000 human civilians. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives who had spent years debating budget allocations and trade agreements suddenly found themselves united by something they had never expected to face. Several members of Congress had family or friends on New Denver. Others had visited the colony during their political careers and remembered the warm hospitality of the farming communities. "What are our options?" asked Representative Paul Garcia from the Mars colonies. "We are mobilizing every available military asset, Admiral," Kane reported via video link. "But our current fleet was designed for patrol duties and anti-piracy operations. We have never prepared for a war against an alien empire." "Then we prepare now," President Foster said firmly. "As of this moment, the United Earth Congress authorizes full military mobilization. Every shipyard will begin converting civilian vessels to military specifications. Every manufacturing facility will shift to defense production. Every person who volunteers for service will be accepted." The mobilization began within hours of the congressional vote. Across human space, civilians lined up at recruitment centers in numbers that overwhelmed the military processing systems. Men and women who had never considered military service suddenly found themselves determined to ensure that what happened to New Denver would never happen to another human world. Captain Roy Henderson commanded the battleship Vengeance, one of the few true warships in the human fleet. His orders were simple but dangerous. Take a small reconnaissance force to New Denver, assess the situation, and determine if any colonists had survived the attack. Everyone understood that this was not a rescue mission in the traditional sense. Henderson's force consisted of 5 ships, including 2 destroyers and a medical vessel. They made the journey to New Denver in 4 days, pushing their engines harder than recommended. When they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, they found the Crathery fleet still in orbit around the devastated world. The Crathery ships detected the human vessels immediately, but they made no move to attack. War Marshal Zephyx apparently wanted the humans to see what had become of their colony. The surface of New Denver was visible even from orbit, a brown and gray wasteland where green farms had once flourished. Technical specialist Linda Park operated the long-range sensors from the bridge of the Vengeance. Her equipment was designed for deep space navigation, but she managed to modify it for planetary scanning. What she found gave everyone on the ship a mixture of hope and horror. "Captain, I'm detecting life signs in the underground areas," Linda reported. "The readings are faint, but there are definitely people alive down there." Henderson opened a communication channel on the emergency frequency that Steve Collins had reported. For several minutes, there was only static. Then a weak voice came through the speakers, and everyone on the bridge recognized it as unmistakably human. This is Dr. Lisa Hayes at New Denver Colony. We have approximately 15,000 survivors in the underground shelters. We are running low on food and medical supplies. The Kratheri ground forces are systematically searching for us. The communication was brief, but it told Henderson everything he needed to know. The colonists were alive, but they were trapped and running out of time. The Kratheri were not just occupying New Denver. They were hunting down the survivors like animals. Henderson made the most difficult decision of his military career. His small force could not defeat the Kratheri fleet, and any rescue attempt would result in the destruction of his ships and their crews. But he could ensure that Earth received a complete intelligence report about Kratheri, capabilities and tactics. The reconnaissance mission returned to Earth with detailed sensor data and tactical analysis of the enemy fleet. More importantly, they brought confirmation that thousands of human civilians were still alive and being hunted by alien soldiers on the surface of New Denver. The news of the survivors reached President Foster while she was touring a shipyard that had converted from building luxury passenger liners to constructing military vessels. The workers, many of whom had volunteered for extra shifts without pay, gathered around her as she shared the update from New Denver. "Our people are alive," she announced. "They are hiding in underground shelters while alien soldiers hunt them like animals. They are surviving on emergency rations and courage while their world burns above them." The effect on civilian morale was immediate and powerful. Across human space, production quotas were exceeded by enormous margins as entire populations worked around the clock to build the fleet that would return to New Denver. Retired military officers came out of retirement to train new recruits. Engineers who had designed civilian equipment began developing new weapon systems. Engineer Commander Greg Thompson had spent his career designing engines for cargo haulers and passenger ships. Now he found himself leading a team of hundreds of specialists who were converting every available vessel into a warship. Cargo ships received armor plating and missile launchers. Passenger liners were modified to carry troops and medical facilities. The transformation of human society was unlike anything in their history. Species that had been known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful trading and diplomatic solutions had become something entirely different. Every human world contributed to the war effort, and every human citizen understood that this was not just about New Denver anymore. Elder Vorak watched these developments from his home world with growing alarm. His ancient archives contained detailed descriptions of what happened when humans reached this level of mobilization, and none of those records ended well for the species that had provoked them. He sent messages to other council members, warning them to prepare for what was coming, but most species were still focused on the Kratheri demonstration of power. On New Denver, Dr. Lisa Hayes continued to coordinate the survival efforts in the underground shelters. Sheriff Tony Blake and Sergeant Carlos Wright organized security teams to defend against Kratheri search parties. Ben Carter worked to maintain morale among the survivors, telling them that help was coming even when he was not sure he believed it himself. But they all knew that time was running out, and above them, War Marshal Zephyx was growing impatient with the hunt for the remaining humans. 3 months after New Denver fell silent, the largest military fleet in human history gathered at the edge of the solar system. Admiral Patricia Kane stood on the bridge of her flagship, the dreadnought Retribution, and watched as more than 3,000 ships formed into attack formations. The fleet stretched across millions of kilometers of space, from massive battleships bristling with weapons to converted cargo haulers that now carried marines and assault equipment. The transformation had been remarkable. Shipyards that once built peaceful trading vessels now produced warships at a rate that amazed even their own engineers. Civilian factories that had manufactured farming equipment and household goods were now turning out weapons, armor, and military supplies around the clock. The entire industrial capacity of human space had shifted to a single purpose. Captain Roy Henderson commanded a task force of 40 ships assigned to eliminate Crathery supply lines. His orders were specific and ruthless. Every Crathery outpost, mining facility, supply depot, and communication relay within 100 light years of New Denver was to be destroyed. No prisoners were to be taken unless they provided useful intelligence. No mercy was to be shown to any Crathay military personnel. The human strategy was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of attacking military targets first, they began by systematically destroying the infrastructure that supported the Crathery war machine. Henderson's task force struck at mining operations in the Vega system, eliminating 3 facilities and their orbital platforms in less than 6 hours. The attacks were coordinated across multiple star systems simultaneously. While Henderson destroyed supply depots in one sector, Captain Ellen Price led her squadron against Crathery communication networks in another. The aliens found themselves cut off from their home worlds, unable to coordinate their defenses or even understand the scope of the human offensive. War Marshal Zephyx received the first reports of the attacks while still orbiting New Denver. The initial intelligence suggested small-scale raids by human patrol vessels, probably desperate attempts to rescue the colonists. He dismissed the reports and continued his systematic hunt for the survivors hiding in the underground shelters. As more reports reached him, Zephyx began to understand that something unprecedented was happening. Human fleets were appearing throughout Crathery space, not just attacking military targets, but completely destroying everything they encountered. Entire star systems that had been part of the Crathery dominion for centuries were suddenly empty. Of any alien presence. Commander Rachel Stone led the assault on Vex Prime, the fortress world that guarded the approaches to the Crathery home system. The planet had never been successfully attacked in over 1,000 years of Crathery history. Its orbital defenses included energy shields, missile platforms, and a garrison of 50,000 elite warriors. The human attack began with a bombardment that lasted for 18 hours without pause. Wave after wave of missiles and energy beams struck the planetary shields until they finally collapsed. Then the troopships moved in, carrying Marines who had trained for months specifically for this assault. Colonel Pete Davis commanded the ground forces that landed on Vex Prime. His Marines had studied every detail of Crathery military tactics and fortress design. They knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage in minimum time. The assault was not just about conquest. It was about demonstrating human capabilities to any aliens who might be watching. The fortress that had stood for a millennium fell in 6 hours. The Crathery defenders fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the human attack. Colonel Davis's Marines moved through the installations like a force of nature, destroying everything in their path and accepting no surrender from enemy combatants. News of Vex Prime's fall reached other alien species within days. The fortress world had been considered impregnable by military experts throughout the galaxy. Its destruction sent shockwaves through every capital city and military headquarters, from the Altarian core worlds to the distant Forthan colonies. War Marshal Zephyx finally understood the magnitude of his mistake when he received a communication from the human fleet that had just arrived in the New Denver system. Admiral Kane's voice was calm and professional, but her message was delivered with absolute certainty. War Marshal Zephyx, I am Admiral Patricia Kane of the Solar Defense Force. You have exactly 1 hour to evacuate your forces from New Denver and surrender unconditionally. If you refuse, we will destroy every Crathery ship in this system and then proceed to eliminate every Crathery military installation in the galaxy. Zephyx looked at his tactical displays and felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. Fear. The human fleet that surrounded his position was larger than any force he had ever seen. Thousands of ships moved in, perfect coordination, their weapons trained on his vessels with deadly precision. "Admiral Kane, I propose we negotiate terms for a ceasefire," Zephyx transmitted. "Surely we can reach an agreement that avoids further bloodshed on both sides." The response came immediately, and it contained no trace of diplomatic flexibility. "There will be no negotiation, War Marshal. You attacked a world full of civilian families and children. You hunted survivors like animals. The only terms we offer are complete surrender or total annihilation." Ambassador Helen Carter had arrived with the fleet, not as a diplomat, but as a witness to what would happen next. She had spent years working to build peaceful relationships between humanity and other species, but New Denver had changed everything. She understood that some actions could not be forgiven or forgotten. Zephyx made his final mistake when he ordered his fleet to attack the human ships. The Crotheri had superior individual vessels and more advanced weapons technology, but they were facing an enemy that fought with an intensity they could not comprehend. The battle lasted less than 4 hours, and when it ended, the Crotheri fleet had been completely destroyed. The liberation of New Denver began immediately after the space battle ended. Human Marines landed near the underground shelters, where the survivors had been hiding for months. Dr. Lisa Hayes emerged from the depths to find Colonel Davis and his soldiers waiting with medical supplies and food. The reunion was emotional beyond description. Colonists who had survived on emergency rations and hope suddenly found themselves surrounded by their own people again. Children who had lived in darkness for months saw sunlight for the first time since the attack. Families that had been separated during the evacuation were reunited, but the humans did not stop with the liberation of New Denver. Admiral Kane's fleet continued deeper into Crotheri space, systematically destroying every military installation and government facility they encountered. The pace of destruction was relentless, and the Crotheri military command structure began to collapse under the sustained assault. Other alien species watched these developments with growing alarm. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were conducting what appeared to be the complete extermination of an entire civilization. Species that had laughed at Elder Vorak's warnings now sent urgent messages to their own fleets, ordering them to avoid all contact with human forces. Elder Vorak himself sent a final message to the Galactic Council, warning them that the humans had reached the point of no return. According to his ancient archives, there was no force in the galaxy that could stop them once they reached this level of mobilization. The only hope was that they would eventually choose to stop on their own. Katie Murphy was among the children rescued from the New Denver shelters. She had lost her entire family in the bombardment, but she had survived by helping care for younger children in the underground facilities. As she watched human ships filling the sky above her ruined world, she understood that something fundamental had changed in the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The war was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Crotheri home system of Crother had stood as the center of their empire for over 2,000 years. Its 3 inhabited worlds housed billions of Crotheri civilians and contained the greatest military academies, government buildings, and cultural centers of their civilization. No enemy force had ever penetrated the outer defense perimeter of the system, and most Crotheri believed their homeworlds were completely safe from any possible attack. Admiral Patricia Kane's fleet arrived at the edge of the Crother system, exactly 1 year after New Denver had fallen. The human armada now numbered over 5,000 ships, reinforced by vessels that had completed construction during the long campaign across Crotheri space. Every major Crotheri military installation, supply depot, and fortress world had been systematically destroyed during the year of advancing warfare. War Marshal Zephyx was no longer in command of Crotheri forces. He had been captured alive during the final battle for the military stronghold of Nexus Station, and was being held aboard the human flagship as a prisoner of war. The new Krathari leadership had sent desperate messages to other alien species, begging for military assistance or at least diplomatic intervention to stop the human advance, but the galaxy had already made its choice. Every major alien civilization had withdrawn their fleets to defensive positions around their own home worlds. None were willing to risk facing the humans in open combat after witnessing the complete destruction of Krathari military power. The humans fought with an intensity and coordination that defied every established theory of galactic warfare. The siege of Krathar began with a communication from Admiral Kane to the planetary governments. Her message was broadcast on all frequencies so that every Krathari civilian could hear her words directly. People of Krathar, I am Admiral Patricia Kane of the Human Solar Defense Force. Your military leaders chose to attack our civilian colonies and hunt our children like animals. We have destroyed your fleets and conquered your worlds in response to that choice. We offer you one final opportunity to surrender and accept occupation by human forces. If you refuse, we will reduce your worlds to uninhabitable ruins. The response came from Premier Vask, the highest-ranking civilian leader still alive in the Krathari government. His voice carried the weight of a species facing extinction. Admiral Kane, we accept full responsibility for the actions of our military forces. We formally surrender the Krathari Dominion to human authority and request mercy for our civilian population. Our children had no part in the decisions that led to this war. Admiral Kane considered the surrender request for exactly 1 minute before responding. During that minute, she thought about the children of New Denver who had hidden in underground shelters for months while Krathari soldiers hunted them. She thought about the families who had been killed in the bombardment of peaceful farming communities. She thought about Dr. Lisa Hayes treating wounded colonists with inadequate medical supplies while their world burned above them. Premier Vask, your surrender is accepted. Human forces will occupy your worlds and establish military government. All Krathari military personnel will be detained for war crimes trials. Your civilian population will be relocated to designated areas under human supervision. The Krathari Dominion is hereby dissolved. The occupation of Krathar proceeded with the same systematic efficiency that had characterized the entire human campaign. Marine units led by Colonel Pete Davis established control of all major population centers within 72 hours. Krathari. Civilians were processed through registration centers and assigned to temporary housing in areas that could be easily monitored by human security forces. Captain Roy Henderson was assigned to oversee the dismantling of Krathari military academies and training facilities. His teams worked methodically through every installation, removing weapons, destroying strategic databases, and ensuring that the Krathari could never again pose a military threat to human space or any other civilization. The war crimes trials began 3 months after the occupation was complete. War Marshal Zefix and 47 other senior Krathari officers were brought before a tribunal of human military judges in the ruins of New Denver. The trials were broadcast throughout human space and to any alien species that wished to observe the proceedings. Ben Carter, now serving as the civilian administrator for the reconstruction of New Denver, testified about the unprovoked attack. On his colony, Dr. Lisa Hayes described the systematic hunting of civilian survivors. Sheriff Tony Blake gave detailed accounts of Krathari soldiers executing prisoners who had tried to surrender. Katie Murphy, now 16 years old and serving as a witness for the prosecution, told the tribunal about watching her family die in the orbital bombardment. Her testimony was delivered in a calm, clear voice that somehow made her words even more devastating than emotional outbursts would have been. War Marshal Zefix was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment on a prison world. That had once been a Krathari military base. The other officers received sentences ranging from 20 years to execution, depending on their individual involvement in attacks on civilian targets. But the trials were only the beginning of the new order that humanity established in what had once been Krathari space. Admiral Kane, promoted to Fleet Admiral and appointed as military governor of the occupied territories, began implementing changes that would ensure this region of space could never again threaten human civilians. Every former Krathari world was assigned a human administrator and garrison. The alien population was required to learn human languages and customs. Krathari children attended schools, where they learned about the consequences of unprovoked aggression and the importance of peaceful coexistence with other species. Commander Rachel Stone established new naval bases throughout the former Krathari territory. These bases served as both defensive installations and clear warnings to any other alien species that might consider testing human resolve. The message was unmistakable. This sector of space now belonged to humanity, and any future attacks on human civilians would result in swift and total retaliation. Elder Vorak requested a meeting with Admiral Kane 6 months after the war ended. The ancient alien traveled to New Denver, which had been completely rebuilt as both a functioning colony and a memorial to those who had died in the attack. The meeting took place in the Memorial Gardens, where the names of every victim were carved in black stone. Admiral Kane, I must share with you the complete records from our archives, Elder Vorak said, his glowing eyes dim with what appeared to be sadness. The warnings my people preserved were not just about human military capabilities. They were about what happens when humans reach the point of total warfare. Elder Vorak activated a holographic display that showed star charts from 10,000 years ago. Entire sectors of space were marked in red, indicating systems that had once contained thriving civilizations, but were now empty and lifeless. The records speak of wars that consumed entire galactic arms. Elder Vorak continued. The humans who fought those wars did not stop until their enemies were completely eliminated. Planets, moons, asteroid belts, even stars themselves were left dead and cold. The archives suggest that your species has the capacity to wage war on a scale that could threaten all life in the galaxy. Admiral Kane studied the ancient star charts for several minutes before responding. Elder Vorak, humanity seeks peace and cooperation with all species who are willing to coexist peacefully. But we will never again allow aliens to attack our civilian populations without facing absolute consequences. Ambassador Helen Carter, who had been present throughout the war as a witness and advisor, was appointed as the new human representative to the Galactic Council. Her first address to the assembled alien species was brief and direct. The Krathari chose to test human resolve by attacking our colonies and hunting our children. They believed we were weak because we preferred negotiation to conquest. The Krathari. Dominion no longer exists. Let this serve as a lesson to any other species that might mistake human peace for human weakness. The galaxy learned to respect humanity, not through their peaceful intentions, but through their demonstrated capacity for total war when those peaceful intentions were betrayed. Trade resumed between human space and other civilizations. But now, every alien species understood exactly what would happen if they ever attacked human civilians. Katie Murphy grew up to become a diplomat, representing the generation of humans who had learned their species' true nature through tragedy and loss. She often visited the Memorial Gardens on New Denver, where the rebuilt colony thrived under the protection of the largest human naval base outside the solar system. The elders had warned them, but they had not listened. Now the galaxy would remember forever what happens when humans are pushed too far. In the end, Elder Vorak's ancient archives had been proven correct. Some species should never be challenged, no matter how peaceful they might appear. Humanity was one of those species, and The empty space where the Krethari Dominion had once existed served as a permanent reminder of that lesson.